Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and of course last time we successfully completed Eloian's arena run, and today it is someone else's turn. Whose, you ask? Well, you might have guessed it, it will be SOLAAR. So, before we get going on that, let's take a closer look at what SOLAAR's strengths and weaknesses are. So, SOLAAR does have, at 10 vitality, the lowest starting HP of any character in our party. So for that reason, like with Eloian last time, we're gonna have to do a fair bit to boost SOLAAR'S HP, otherwise we are at somewhat significant risk of getting taken out in one hit, and of course, as soon as that happens, we're done. No way of coming back from that. So that's something we're gonna want to bear in mind. The other thing is, SOLAAR is also unique in that they can only equip stoles in the chestplate spot. We'll talk more about that in a second, but that does mean that that's another defensive way in which SOLAAR is at quite a disadvantage. So we're definitely going to want to try to find ways to make up for that low vitality. However, we do have very high, 20 spirit to start off with, and 17 agility is not bad either. So that's what SOLAAR has going on from an attribute standpoint. And of course, SOLAAR is light elemental, meaning that they will begin with 20% resistance to light and 20% weakness to dark. So let's take a closer look at the items now. Because SOLAAR, like we were saying, you can only use stoles. So in that way, you are the second most limited in what you can use on the chestplate spot after Legion. So this is one of the reasons why I was making a bit of a point of picking up the steel stole from the blacksmith in Santusia. It did take a silver ore, and silver ore is limited, yes, however, with 10 defense, that is far and away the best pure defensive option for SOLAAR. Now, it does also give several defensive reactions that SOLAAR can only get from this item here, so I made a point of mastering those. And the 50% resistance to physical damage does mean that if we are concerned about SOLAAR getting one-shot by physical damage, this is the best way of making sure that that doesn't happen. However, it does not have anything in the way of any other resistances, nor does it have any magic defense. So in that way, it is perhaps a little bit one-dimensional. So if you are purely trying to limit physical damage, then this is the way to go. But if not, then you might want to go with something a little more well-rounded. And with that in mind, we could find ourselves going for something like the Green Stole. So this has 6 defense and 6 magic defense, so in total, that is, of course, a little bit more than the Steel Stole had, spread out across defense and magic defense. It also comes with plus 6 vitality, so like we were saying before, SOLAAR starts off with a really low vitality, and we are going to want to find as many ways as we can to boost their HP, and I think for that reason, it's probably the front runner here that we use the Green Stole. However, let's entertain the other options at least here. We could theoretically go with the Azure Stole. This one again giving 6 defense and 6 magic defense. In terms of attributes that it boosts, it is of course Spirit here, and SOLAAR is a bit of a hybrid character in that SOLAAR is capable of using either magic abilities or physical attacks to reasonable effect. Of course, magical abilities will cost MP, and that does mean that we will perhaps be at risk of running out of that and needing to spend a turn or two to restore some MP on occasion, which does mean that we're perhaps making ourselves vulnerable to getting hit at that point in time. So boosting some more spirit not only makes our magic abilities stronger, but also boosts our MP as well. So this could be a reason to go for the Azure Stole. And then, like I was saying, SOLAAR can also use physical attacks. I'd argue maybe not quite as effectively as magic abilities, but it's certainly an option. And so going for the Scarlet Stole here with 6 defense, 6 magic defense, and 6 strength would be the best route if we were trying to emphasize those physical attacks, because that would mean that we would perhaps not need to use our magic abilities quite as often. So you could make a case, but I think that is probably a bit of a stretch. We probably would prefer to go with what I would argue is the safest route here, that being the Green Stole, and that regardless of what kind of enemy we are going up against, it will be useful for us to have that additional HP coming from that 6 vitality, whereas something like the Steel Stole, if we find we're going against enemies that use magic abilities or non-physical abilities, then suddenly this isn't all that useful to us. So I think for that reason, let's go with the Green Stole there. Then in terms of the helmet spot, I think our strongest options will be either the Feather Crest, Gloria's starting helmet, which gives 1 defense and 4 magic defense, so would be a way to, perhaps if we had gone with the Steel Stole, counter the lack of magic defenses there by focusing on those a little bit more on the helmet spot. +1 Spirit as well does give a little bit of a boost to magic abilities and MP, so that's maybe not a huge factor, but it's something. The empowers, well, not only do those not actually do anything, Solar also doesn't have access to any fire, water, air, or earth abilities, so yeah, for that reason I think that if we were to go with the Steel Soul, perhaps this would be the way to go, but I think we're probably gonna be more intrigued by these other options here, those being the Black Hat, which has only 1 defense, no magic defense, but it does have 50% dark resistance, and so one thing that we have to bear in mind is that because Solar only has access to stoles, remember that in, I believe it was all of our previous arena runs thus far, we've used either the Night Jacket, which has amazing resistances, in particular to dark, but even to other elements as well, and Slimmick I think was the one person who didn't use it. They instead used the Mithril Plate Mail, which did have a little bit of ether resistance and light resistance. However, from the stoles, we are getting precisely nothing. No resistances at all. If we'd gone with the Steel Soul, yes, we would have gotten physical, but nothing in the way of elements, moral, or spiritual resistances at all. So for that reason, I think we want to make even more of a point of picking that up on things like helmets or accessories. So for that reason, I think the Black Hat is perhaps more intriguing with Solar than it is with anyone else. Not to mention, Solar being light elemental does start off with some dark weakness, so to make up for that a little bit with the Black Hat does seem like that is a very strong option here. Final thing that we might consider would be the Elf Cap, I'd say, with 3 defense and 3 magic defense. Probably the best option in terms of pure defenses. Does give a little bit in the way of earth resistance, so again, if we were trying to get a little bit more of that, then this could be a reasonable way to do it, because not only does Solar not have access to some of those chest plates that have resistances like the Night Jacket, Rainbow Shirt, or even the Geo Jacket, that does mean that, of course, Solar also does not have access to the skills that those items give us, namely Resist Earth. So we can't make up for the lack of a resistance on a chest plate by throwing on passive abilities that give us resistances there. Solar doesn't have access to them. The only one that Solar does have access to is Resist Ether, because that comes from an accessory. So for that reason, although I do probably prefer Dark Resistance, getting on Earth Resistance is certainly not a bad thing, and this does have better defense and magic defense than the Black Hat, so it's tempting, but I think I will still go with the Black Hat here. Then, in terms of those accessories, I want to take a moment to talk about the Soul Stone, because we picked this up in the Miasmal Citadel, and it is an item that gives us 5 Spirit, which is a ton, so if we were trying to make a point of maximizing that, then we would probably opt to go for this. However, look at what else it has, and the answer is precisely nothing. No defenses, no resistances, so what I did was I mastered the new Astral Form ability that this item gives us, and so I'm looking forward to showing you guys what that one's all about once we get into the arena. But I think now that we've done that, this is probably not an item that we actually want to equip for this arena run, because while the Spirit is nice, I don't think we can afford to put on something that doesn't have any vitality or resistances when Solar has such a lack of those two things. So for that reason, if we're looking at the Scarab of Health, it does have good defenses and good vitality. The auto regen is nice as well. The resistances to statuses is a small bonus, as we said before, yes, and this has of course been extremely effective for our previous arena runs. However, you could make the case that perhaps it's not as effective with Solar, because, as we were saying before, Solar has far less access to elemental resistances than anyone else. So perhaps we would rather have an item here that instead gives us a lot of resistances. So this one, I'm not so sure about. Don't get me wrong, the Scarab of Health is certainly still an amazing item, it just doesn't have any elemental resistances, and with Solar, that is something that we're gonna want to try to find other ways to make happen, otherwise we might find that we have almost none. Similar story with the Yellow Fairy. The haste also has been absolutely fantastic for us in previous arena runs, however, no defenses, no vitality, no resistances. All it does is give us haste. Could we perhaps make a point of doing something like relying on speedy juices? potions that give us haste instead of leaning on the Yellow Fairy, so that way we could throw on something else that gives us other defenses and resistances rather than only haste from this item here. I don't know. That's a difficult one because of course it does take a turn to apply the speedy juices, and we only have 3 of them. So we would have to be very choosy in terms of when and where we use them, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to make that happen reliably enough to make up for not having haste on all the time from the Yellow Fairy, so another tough question. If we were to go more the defenses and resistances route, then the Sapphire Bangle would probably be a strong candidate here, what with its 3 defense, 3 magic defense, 50% resistance to water, and a bit more spirit as well. Gives us many of the things that we were saying we would be interested in picking up. Similarly, with the Emerald Bangles, defenses as well, resistance to earth, vitality, also things that we would like to have. I would probably make the case that if you did not choose to go with the green stole on the chestplate spot, then you would be hard-pressed to find something better than the Emerald Bangle in the accessory spot, because otherwise, how else are you going to get the vitality that you're looking for? It would be pretty difficult. So, because we are going with the green stole here, I think we may be able to pass on these Emerald Bangles, but it is still awfully tempting. The other way to boost our resistances, specifically light and dark, would be SOLAAR'S starting accessory here, the Eclipse Amulet, which is fantastic, and we probably should have considered this for other people as well. I'm not sure that we did, but with 2 defense, 5 magic defense, spirit, and 50% resistance to both light and dark, it is really well-rounded. And there's another reason why, for SOLAAR specifically, this is such a strong item, which does make me really tempted to throw this on here, but basically it's a question of, is it better than the Yellow Fairy and the Scarab of Health? And I would say, for other people, maybe not, but for SOLAAR, you could make the case that it is. And then, similarly, we could go with the Onyx Ring or the Moonstone Ring if we were trying to maximize our light or dark resistances there. These, of course, are not as strong as the Eclipse Amulet in terms of defenses, with only 3 magic defense, and yes, they do have the 50% resistance to one of those elements, but not both of them. So, it's, I think, harder to make the case for these, but you'll see why I'm talking about perhaps trying to focus on dark and light resistances in a bit. So, this one, I'm not sure there is necessarily an objectively correct answer. We have, of course, had so much success with the Yellow Fairy and Scarab of Health that I think, let's try making this work. It does bring SOLAAR to 1,700, nearly 1,800 HP. So I think that I'm feeling pretty good about where that leaves us. Then, when it comes to weapons, we only have the Raptor Claw at the moment, which has 34 base attack. That is actually less than the base attack that Eloise had on her item that we used. So, for that reason, yes, like we were saying, SOLAAR is theoretically capable of using physical attacks to reasonable effect, but we might find that with the item that we currently have here, this weapon's not going to be strong enough to rely too heavily on those physical attacks. We might need to lean on magic just a little bit more. One thing to note here is that we did, of course, go to the arena before we finished other endgame content, and I would argue that that is probably affecting SOLAAR more than anyone else. So, for that reason, if you are either doing things in different order here, or if you're having trouble with SOLAAR'S arena run, then I would say that perhaps worth waiting until you are done with other endgame content and then finishing with SOLAAR'S arena run here. We're doing things a little bit early with SOLAAR, and so for that reason, this might be a little bit more difficult than it would normally be. But, other than that, we are, of course, using all of our potions here, so plenty of those to fall back on. Let's talk about skills for a second, though. And so when it comes to active skills here, SOLAAR, of course, has access to many light elemental abilities, including Solar Flare, which deals light damage to one enemy at a time. That is one of SOLAAR'S largest weaknesses as it currently stands, is that SOLAAR can only damage one enemy at a time, so against big groups, I think we could find that we're going to struggle a little bit there. So look out for any battles in which we're facing numerous enemies at once. Those will likely be some of the most challenging ones. We do have some healing, and the ability to, well, Resurrect is not going to do anything when there's only going to be one person in the arena, so that one not so relevant. Spiritcraft is interesting. This is a fantastic skill for supporting other members of the party when there are other members of the party to boost spirit. Does of course mean that they're dealing more damage with their magic abilities, healing more with their healing abilities, and also restoring NP. However, that does mean of course that we're spending a turn to support ourselves in this case, so if, say, we were out of MP and we needed to make a point of getting back that MP, then this could be a way to do it. If you were out of potions that restore MP like others, then maybe you would have to rely on Spiritcraft. We did, of course, load up on those, so I don't necessarily think that we're going to be using it all that often, if at all, but it is theoretically an option. Then Purify removes all negative status effects, which could be useful. Again, in theory, we'll have remedies to remove those, so if you didn't have those, you could use Purify instead. Purify is, of course, a spell, and therefore, if you are cursed or silenced, then Solar would not be able to do it, so there is that side effect, and for that reason, remedies are theoretically a slightly better option there. You can always use those. Then Astral Form, this is the new ability that I was referring to, that we just mastered, and it shifts the body to a different level of existence, where it becomes ethereal. Non-elemental damage is nullified. Physical damage, none of it. 100% resistance. Other elemental damage is absorbed as HP, and natural elements do only half damage. So, this is one of the ways that Solar can make up for having limited access to elemental resistances. Astral Form, of course, does take a turn to activate. However, once we do, we get pretty fantastic resistances here. However, there is one exception, one thing that is not actually listed in this description here, that we will check out as soon as we get a chance to try out this ability in the actual battle. As for offensive reactions here, we don't have too many options. We have, well, generally speaking, damage, and the only thing that we don't have selected at the moment is poison. Now, it's only 20% chance to trigger, so won't happen all the time. It is, of course, a way to add a little bit of damage to our attacks. However, it is most effective in long fights, and for the most part, we're going to want to be taking out enemies as quickly as possible. So I think that this is probably something that, if we did have the RP to make happen, then we would consider it, yes. But it's mostly something that's effective against big bosses that we can deal a fair bit of damage to over time with that poison, and against the, what I'm hoping are primarily just typical enemies, this won't be as relevant. So I think I'm okay with not putting this on here. Of course, we could perhaps take off something like Quarry Undead and we'd get closer still, but we wouldn't quite have enough, or get rid of our accuracy, that would be enough. I think let's go with the consistency on accuracy here, but you could make the case that this is worth it to make this swap. Let's stick with accuracy. Then, defensive reactions. Because Solar does not have access to normal chest plates, only souls, these are extremely limited. So this is why Solar, in addition to having low HP with very limited access to defensive reactions, is one of, if not the, squishiest of characters. So this is why it was a big deal to pick up the Steel Stole, because that's where we learned the minus 20% damage as well as the Soak 30. And without those, you're looking at very limited damage reduction here. So we're hoping that we have enough HP, that this won't be too much of a problem. We did, of course, put on the Green Stole largely for that reason. Fortunately, we will definitely have enough RP to use all these things here, but bear that in mind. Offensive reactions for magic, well, we'll use all those here. And then for defenses, we could have theoretically gone back and mastered one of the other elemental ones, yes, but similar story here where, because we're not able to use rogues, which tend to be the places where you're getting most access to magic defensive reactions, not a lot of options here. So this would be one that, yes, if we did have a little bit more time to master up more abilities, then we would have preferred, of course, to throw on one more here. Didn't quite master resist fire, but we'll take what we can get here, so we'll run with these. And then in terms of passive abilities, let's take a closer look here. We are currently using plus 20% HP. So when we saw how much HP Solar had, bear that in mind, this was already with that additional HP boost here. This would be another way, if you were to say not use the plus 6 Vitality Stole to make up for Solar's low HP, would be to load up with maybe plus 20% and 10% as well. If you've already mastered the ability from that +6 stole, the +3 vitality, then you can throw that on as well, or maybe even +2 and +1. That would be maximizing SOLAAR'S HP, and another thing to consider is how much have you leveled up SOLAAR. If SOLAAR is a pretty low level, then that might be necessary for that reason as well. As I was saying, in terms of resistances, all we have is resist Ether, and SOLAAR with Astral Form can become completely resistant, in fact heal to Ether damage, so this is also the element that SOLAAR least needs, you could argue. So for that reason, this is going to be a bit different, I think, in terms of which skills we take with SOLAAR on the passive side relative to other people. We probably will want to make a point of picking up attributes rather than resistances, because sure, we could throw on resist Ether, and then that does mean that we wouldn't have to use Astral Form quite as often. Perhaps there's reason to do that. Otherwise, we could go pure HP, and we can't quite afford to throw on plus 10% HP as well. I think that is probably better than just +1 vitality. So if we wanted to do absolutely everything in our power to boost SOLAAR'S HP, let's just take a look at where that would leave us. It would leave us at basically 2,400, which is about 3 times as much as SOLAAR would have had otherwise, once you factor in that we gained HP from equipping the Stole and all those abilities as well. The 852 is how much we had before we threw all those things on. So yes, pretty dramatic difference. Do we need that much HP? It does seem like perhaps we're overcompensating a bit, so I don't think we do, per se. Of course, it does help, yes, but we might find that it is more useful to throw on other things instead. We also have not mastered too many things in the way of status immunities here. All we have right now is Insomnia for sleep immunity, and of course, we don't necessarily know. We might find that the arena has 0 enemies that could cause SOLAAR to go to sleep. I would argue that sleep is perhaps one of the worst ones, though, because it means that you can't take your turn, and so you can't use an item to remove it, unlike things like, say, Blind or Curse. Sure, you'll still take your turn, you may not be able to use your abilities, but as long as you have a remedy to remove that status, you can make it happen, whereas sleep could go on for a long time, or confusion, things of that sort, paralysis that could prevent you from taking your turn. So it may be worth having us throw this on here, and in terms of which type of HP is most efficient for us to scale with, I think it's probably not Vitality. I think it probably is 20% HP here. So let's go this route. And then we could throw on Resist Ether, because if we don't feel like we need quite as much HP, then that really is one of the few options we have remaining here. I think, yes, you could go the Strength route. Like we were saying, perhaps you want to boost SOLAAR'S physical attack power more so that we don't need to use spells as often. Or you could throw on Spirit so that the magic abilities are stronger and so that you have more MP so that you don't blow through that MP quite as quickly. But I think, let's just take one more look at where exactly that leaves us from an HP standpoint. 1,800 or so. I'm feeling pretty decent about that. I think we could, of course, throw on one more Vitality here, but maybe we do throw on a little bit of Spirit to give us the MP and additional magic power. So let's go that route, and let's see where that leaves us. In terms of HP, yes, 1,800 or so. MP, about 180. Then resistances, some in the way of light, dark, and ether resistance. Of course, remember we do have Astral Form, which will be our primary way of boosting those resistances, so maybe we're still feeling okay with this, but for the most part, there are very few ways to go above and beyond this other than throwing on other things in the accessory spot other than our Scarab of Health and Yellow Fairy. And so, in the interest of keeping those on, perhaps we do stick with what we have here, in which case, let's give it a shot. So let's save up before we go, just in case we find ourselves a little bit overwhelmed or in a situation similar to what we saw with Slinick. Now, as we saw with Slinick, they were only capable of dealing certain kinds of damage, fire, earth, non-elemental. SOLAAR is somewhat similar in that case, in that they can do light elemental damage and not much beyond that. So make sure that you have loaded up on your potions that deal elemental damage, just in case you're going up against some enemies that are particularly resistant to light damage, otherwise you could get trapped. But here we go. And it does, of course, mean that we are getting SOLAAR'S fantastic music. As for who's first, it is, a SOLAAR'S. Okay, so we saw some of these guys, I thought, pretty late on in Eloian's arena run. And of course, Eloian's arena run turned out to be relatively straightforward, but based on how we're starting out here, it seems like perhaps things won't be quite as simple with SOLAAR. Fortunately, this is someone who is quite weak to light damage, so for that reason we could, say, go with something like a Solar Flare here, and we hope that that's enough damage to take it out in one hit. Give it a shot. Certainly is. Only level 21 version of that enemy there, and I think when we actually run into those guys in the Miasmal Citadel, they will be ranging from level 28 to 34, so a weaker version than what we would normally see. As for who's next, well, the answer is 2 of them. So note that the turn order here has SOLAAR going, but then both SOLAAR'S go next. Even though we have haste, they sneak in between turns here. So that means that we could take out one, but the other one will get the chance to hit us. So again, we were talking before about how SOLAAR is only capable of attacking one enemy at a time. And so this is perhaps where we get put to the test in that regard. Fortunately, we took only a little bit of damage there. It was Ether Elemental, and of course that is one of the things that we took a little bit of resistances of. And we healed off all that damage with our regen. So no big issues there. Let's just use another Solar Flare. But because we are relying pretty heavily early on our magic abilities here, we do want to keep an eye on our NP. So let's not get too carried away with that. If and when we can save some, and we probably do want to do that. But here we find even more SOLAAR'S, and I'm not sure we're going to have too much opportunity to make that happen. So let's take one out here. They will both go next. And we want them to use those other abilities, because we do have more resistances to those, so sure. We don't quite restore all of our HP here. Now, we do take 2 turns before they go, so we could theoretically take them both out with Solar Flares before they get the chance to go again. That is probably the way we go here. We could, if we wanted to, say, take one out and then restore some HP or MP, but I think we probably want to save that for a later date when we have a little bit more HP to restore, or MP for that matter, because the regen, yeah, that took care of everything on the HP side. The MP side, that perhaps a little bit more of a concern. I actually missed our reaction there. Fortunately, we did still have enough damage. Dark Essence, sure. Round 4, who's next? A Black Eye. So fortunately, it does seem as though, remember that because we're going against enemies that are tailored specifically for SOLAAR, they are all enemies that are, at least thus far, weak to light damage. So, should mean that we can continue to do a little bit more of the same with Solar Flares. However, bear in mind that the Black Eye does have 30 magic defense, so it was pretty effective to use that against the SOLAAR'S, yes, but against the Black Eye, should deal considerably less damage. So, might it be worth, say, testing out a physical attack here? Let's see what kind of damage we have here. It is non-elemental, and so for that reason, we don't get to take advantage of the light elemental damage abilities. Let's compare. So we had, what was it, 476 with the physical attack, and then the spell is slightly more than that, but not much. They actually dealt light damage to us, which is a little strange, but we lost a bit in the way of defenses, which is concerning, because if this battle is to go on a little while longer, which it may, given how much HP this Black Eye has, then that could start to wear us down a bit. Now, yes, we did see that Solar Flare dealt a little bit more damage, however, it does, of course, use MP, whereas physical attacks do not, so I would argue maybe it is actually preferable to still go with the physical attacks here, even if it's a little bit slower, and maybe, of course, we just happen to have gotten the lower end of the range with our physical attack there, maybe we got the higher end of the range with our magic ability. Dark damage there. Fortunately, we did load up on, well, load up is maybe the wrong way to phrase that, a little bit of dark resistance. We have some, so not that bad in that regard. We could, of course, heal ourselves if we felt that was necessary, but again, the regen was enough there. So let's continue with the default attacks. I think that is probably still the way that we go here. And thus, we will do it again. And yes, it does seem that that damage is still roughly equivalent to what we had with our spells. However, the Black Eye did just throw on a physical shield, so I think for that reason, because it will now halve the amount of physical damage that we deal, now is probably the time to switch back to our magic abilities with Solar Flare. And there, well, maybe we did get the higher end of the range previously, because that was only 358 damage. So one more hit should do it, it would seem. So with that, we restore all of our HP. However, we have 2 turns in which to take out this Black Eye. I think that we take this first turn to restore our MP, either with a Mana Berry or I think actually an Ether probably would be fine here. If we have enough MP that we're missing, that yeah, that even doesn't quite restore all of our MP, but brings us almost to full. So now let's use a Solar Flare here to take you out. Of course, that means we'll be spending a little bit more in the way of MP, but we get back to a lot more than what we had. So I think we're still in good shape here. As for round 5, roughly halfway through here, and uh-oh. Oh no. Pixie. Well, that is the ability that would normally confuse us. Don't believe we had the confuse resistance on. Let's just double check here. It was sleep that we have complete resistance to. We do have 10% coming from the Scarab of Health. Was that the difference maker there? It might have been. Might have just been that the Pixie happened to have gotten an unlucky roll. Of course, we'll never really know. But as for damaging the Pixie, the thing about it is that it has 60% evasion. So that means physical attacks are pretty hard to land. So we'll probably want to go for a spell here, and fortunately, nothing in the way of light resistance, so that does mean that something like Solar Flare will almost certainly be the answer here. But it does also have a magic shield, so it doesn't take it out. Uh-oh. So, it also has haste, so we see here that because we both have haste, we'll be alternating turns and more or less cancels each other's hastes out. It's almost like neither of us have haste in this instance. So it did also just silence us. So that is concerning, because what that means is that if we were trying to use magic abilities here, we cannot. We have to get rid of it. So that probably means that we need to spend a turn here using a remedy to remove that status, and we hope that Pixie doesn't turn around and reapply it. It also has regen, so in many ways it has much the same setup that we do at the moment, but with its haste and regen. So that means that, yes, we've dealt a little bit of damage to it, but it's already healed off much of it. So we'll deal some more here, but it will take... Oh, that will just barely be enough? Okay. Wasn't sure if we would need another round there. Fortunately, got away with that one. I would argue that is far and away the most difficult one that we've fought thus far. So as for round 6, who do we have next? Lots of dark elementals, which is fitting, given how Solar, we encounter them in the Dark Temple. So these are also very weak to light, so fortunate in that regard. And they are also with 0 magic defense, so that should mean that using Solar Flare is definitely the way to go here. Let's try it out. How much damage do we have? Certainly enough. And I think that, as we may have been suspecting previously, yes, our MP is going to be more of a factor with Solar than it was with any of our previous arena participants, because we already used an Ether, and we are already back at roughly half MP, and more MP to burn here. Fortunately, we should be able to take out the last of them this time round. We will not have time to use any potions to restore that MP. It's not urgent at this stage, but depending on who we find in the next round, we'll see how this one plays out here. Round 7 is against a monster. In terms of weakness to light, yes, it certainly has that, and it also has 0 magic defense, so yes, Solar Flare would be most effective. However, is this perhaps an instance in which we could try saving some MP by using physical attacks instead? Perhaps it is, but I think that might be a little bit too much of a risk here. I do also think that this monster could hit fairly hard. Oh, actually, come to think of it, this is the monster that we actually saw way back at the beginning of Chapter 1 in the tutorial, not the ones that are from the Dark Temple. So, that being said, Hero Mardek, Hero Dugan were the ones to fight them. Solar, however, now this time I think we can probably save MP by just going with the default attack. Unless you miss with it, you should certainly have enough damage and save a little bit of MP in the process. No problem there. On to round 8, And for this one, we will have Amberistals. Now, this is a little bit tricky, because these guys, unlike many of the enemies that we fought previously, do not have weakness to light. So that means that light attacks, light spells, not going to be nearly as effective. Also, 40 magic defense means that Solar Flare, definitely not the answer against these guys. We're probably going to want to use physical attacks, so they have 0 physical defense. However, they also have physical shields on, so they will have the amount of damage that we deal with physical attacks. So we could go with that, or perhaps with one of our damaging potions. Let's take a look. They are fire elemental, meaning they are weakest to water. Perhaps using some really cold water here might actually be the most effective route to take. Let's give this a shot. How much damage does this deal? Ooh, only 200. So, not quite as much as we would have liked, perhaps. And, okay, so now we'll have 2 turns in a row. Does that mean we go with a physical attack instead? Do we go with more really cold waters? Let's gauge how much damage we can do with a physical attack here. I think we saw against other enemies, we were dealing roughly in the 400 damage range, meaning that with the 200 damage we dealt with the really cold water, it should be roughly the same here. That's actually a little bit more. So maybe we try it again here. Does seem like it's a little bit better. And fortunately, we can regen all the damage that we just took there and take you out. So we didn't have to spend any MP. That much is nice, yes, but I'm a little bit surprised to see that it turned out that our physical attack was actually more effective than using those potions, but it worked. Round 9, we're getting close here. And it is the Molester, which is one of the mini-bosses from the Dark Temple. So this one is, again, fitting for Solar, given how we initially found Solar in the Dark Temple. As a reminder, as to what is the deal with this enemy here. Again, very weak to light, so that's fortunate. 10 magic defense, 10 physical defense, meaning doesn't make a huge difference which one we go for there, but our physical attacks are physical elemental, whereas our magic abilities are light. So for that reason, I think, again, Solar Flare will be the way to go. How much damage can it deal? About 1,000, which means, well, it's going next. And it deals dark damage. We do have some dark resistance there, and enough of that we can heal off all the damage with the regen there. So no huge problem there either. We are starting to run pretty low on the MP, though. So if we do this, we might be able to take you out in one more turn. I think we dealt slightly less than 1,155 damage on our previous spell, but if we get a little bit lucky, we might be able to take you out. But at that rate, that does mean that we'd be going into the final fight with pretty low MP, which might not be something we want to do. We might want to deliberately, proactively restore some MP here, so we're going into that final fight with basically full MP, in case we find that we're going against someone who's quite difficult, which could very well be the case. It does mean we'll take a little bit more damage in the process, but given now we have enough resistances that that's not a major concern, I think that'll be fine. Then let's go for a Solar Flare. It may not take you out, not quite. Should be able to follow up with just a physical attack here. That does do the trick. So you're down, and now for the final opponent, we saw that typically those will be mini-bosses. That was the case with most of our previous arena runs, yes. However, we did just have one there in round 9, so what does that mean for round 10? It is a Golem, which I believe we actually did find as one of the enemies in, I think it was Slinik's arena run. Now, the problem is that, although this technically isn't so much a mini-boss, arguably not as much as the enemy that we just fought previously, it is, however, one that does not have weakness to light. So we had the fortune of going against enemies that were weak to our primary type of elemental damage. Not so lucky this time around. 30 physical defense means that we almost certainly will not want to use our normal attacks here. We will want to go the magic route, but do we have enough damage to make it happen? Not sure we have too many other options here. We could also consider throwing on our astral form here, because this is an enemy that I think we're probably expecting to hit us with either physical or earth damage. So let's give this a shot. As a reminder, it shifts the body to a different level of existence, where it becomes ethereal. Non-elemental damage is nullified, so for that reason, would be very helpful defensively in that regard. Other elemental damage is absorbed as HP. Probably not going to be a factor in this case, but natural elements only do half damage. That would be nice as well. So let's give it a shot here. And yes, we basically turn into a ghost. And if we look at our resistances here, we do get those 50% resistances to fire, water, air, earth, which could be relevant here, heal a ton from ether damage, and are completely immune to non-elemental damage. However, remember that I was saying how there was an exception or two based on the description of that skill that we didn't necessarily know in advance until we actually activated it, that being that it actually lowers your resistances to light, dark, fig, and thalma. So, for that reason, we definitely did not want to activate this ability when we were going against all those dark elemental enemies, because we would have been putting ourselves at pretty serious risk. With 70% dark weakness, that is why I was saying previously, throwing on the black hat for Solar is more useful than it is for just about anyone else, in addition to Solar not having access to resistances in many other places. Also the reason why I was saying we might want to consider using Solar's starting accessory or other things that boost our light or dark resistances so that we could counter the fact that that is what becomes our biggest weaknesses when we use Astral Form. On this occasion, I think we'll be okay because I don't suspect that this golem can hit us with either light or dark damage. So we're only getting the benefits and not the downsides here. But as for our next turn, let's go with the Solar Flare here. That is our best source of damage, we were saying. And it's about 700, 800 damage or so. And there we see, yes, if you're using physical damage, we can't get hurt, so we should be pretty safe. If you mix things up a little bit, start going the Earth route, then we'll take half damage, which hopefully still is low enough that we shouldn't be too concerned about that. But we'll have to see. Here we got the high end of the roll that time, it seemed. Again, yes, I mean you missed, so of course no damage there at all for that reason. We'll keep on solar flaring, and yes, we are blowing through our MP pretty quickly here, and that is partially the reason why I was saying previously was worthwhile to restore that when we had the chance to do so. Once again, physical damage means we're taking nothing, and then Solar Flare here could be final move, and that it is, and Solar levels up as well to celebrate. Fitting. And unfortunately, we won't remain a ghost forever, but as you can see there, for that reason, when you are expecting enemies to deal physical damage, water, fire, air, earth, or certainly ether damage, then that is a very effective skill. If you do think that people are going to use light, dark, fig, or thalma skills against you, then it is perhaps best that you save that for another time. But with that, Solar has successfully completed their arena run. Congratulations, fighter! You've won the tournament, apparently. Here, have a prize. Also, get out of here. Alright, so congratulations, Solar. Let's take a look at what you picked up. So it is the Star Charm, which is again an accessory with 4 defense, 4 magic defense, a special item that Solar won from the arena. Only they can equip it. And it gives the Lunatic Howl ability. Okay, we'll want to check that one out for sure. It's only usable by Solar, and it gives plus 4 spirit and 2 agility, resistance to light, resistance to dark. Could perhaps be another item that is similar to the Eclipse Amulet, and that it also can help cover for when Solar is using the Astral Form ability. So well done, Solar. Let's perhaps have a quick chat with our latest victor. What do you have to say about that arena run, Solar? Yes, my leg lackey. Bi-legged friend thing? Do you need anything? Well, I was wondering, are you a boy dog or a girl dog? Oof. I don't acquire your meaning there, buddy man. What is a boy dog and or a girl dog? Those words are strange to me. Can you explainerize the difference to me? Well, I'm not really sure myself, but I think that girl dogs like flowers and wear bows in their hair, but boy dogs like woofing and barking and chasing things. But so do some girl dogs, so I don't know. Oh, Mardek. I like flowers and fighting. Even fighting flowers, but not flowers fighting. That's wrong. I can't wear or wield a bow, though, because I lack arms. Look, see? I make up for it by havifying many a leg. Double pairs. So, you're a girl and a boy? I don't get it. This is ridiculous. Ignorance is. Look, I mean, what is your gender? Oh, you should know full well, Mr. Spirit-Shifted Enukai, that we have no gender. You don't either. You're not even a Mr. Or Mr. I'd adorate that noise. But no, stop, wait. This gender is a quaint and bizarre anomaly, common to silly, simple species sometimes. Asking me my gender is like, Willie's, I'm of the Bright Cast, so what, Mr. Human Nighttime, is your cast? What cast are you? Huh? Cast? Exactly! It's a non-concept to you. You don't know. You don't have one. I don't have a sex cast either. A gender. Again there. I am one. We are all one. We can all be one together. Me and my kind, you know? Talking to you is really hard. Well, thanks a lot! For all the fish, too. Not that you gave me any. Wah! I think maybe we should resume our certification for that glum, mopey, dark rock I'm meant to be overseeing, eh? Who knows who it's bullying while we prattle on like milkmaids? Not that I know what they are, because I don't understand gender. Or humans. Anyway. Okay, so there's a bit more from Solar, our latest arena champion. We picked up the Star Charm as our reward, and as for who is up next, well, tune in next time to find out.